Hello and welcome to Diminishing Returns. I think last week I said we were doing Deep Blue Sea. This week we're not. We're doing Kung Fu Hustle. So if you were expecting sharks, sorry, it's Kung Fu and subtitles. But we're doing sharks next week. Alright, so Kung Fu Hustle. Enjoy. This week it's Kung Fu Hustle, which is my personal selection. I am Sol, and I am joined as ever by Mr. Calvin Dyson San.
Hello.
And Alan.
Hello.
And you can't tell, but this whole intro is being dubbed because we're doing it in foreign. You know, we like to theme it with relation to the film we're covering.
Well, I like to think that mine is subtitled, actually. I'm not a big fan of dubbed
Ooh,
versions.
and this film has got a horrendous dub. Have you guys seen it dubbed?
No,
I hope you watched it subtitled.
Yes. No, I've only seen the film the once, and for this recording, and it was subtitled. I was very strict about that.
Good.
Well, the first time I ever watched it, I know it was subtitled. When I came to watch it this week, the only version I could find was dubbed. And it was just like, I'll have to just make do. But I found the dub was okay. It wasn't distracting or anything. It was all right.
It's one of the worst dubs I've ever encountered. The DVD, for whatever reason, the default setting is English dub, and you have to go into the settings and change it to like the original audio track and subtitles. And it's all the characters at the start are just like, "Oh my, hey, it's me, why don't you shut up? Oh, what are you doing coming into this shop?" It's like, it's awful. No one sounds like a real person. They're all cartoon voices.
Well, is there a reason for why that is the default on DVD? Because from what I understand, this was one of the first sort of foreign Hong Kong films to make it big, like on a mainstream level in, the US, certainly. Is that true? Am I along the right lines? I don't know much of the background history of the film,
Certainly, I went to see it in the cinema and it was subtitled. And I remember seeing trailers for it in front of whatever mainstream, film I'll have been going to see circa 2004. So, Anyway.
How did you come to this film, Alan? Had you seen it before? I know Saul was a big fan. This is my first viewing. Had you seen it before?
I saw it many years ago, when it came out, I presume. I didn't see it at the cinema or anything like that. But, it garnered enough attention at the time that I was aware of it. And so I watched it. I really liked it, actually. And then when I watched it again, more recently, it kind of went down in my memory. Not that I didn't enjoy it, but it kind of blew me away the first time I saw it. It was so different.
Yeah, I had the same. The first time I saw it, I was, like you say, very much just like, wow! This is what films can be?
So where do we start then?
Well, we should probably explain what the film is. It's probably one of the more obscure films we've covered on the show, so there's probably quite a few people listening who don't know it. I mean, what is it? It's a comedy from Stephen Chow from Hong Kong. It's, as the name would suggest, a kung fu movie. But it's I don't know. It came out the same year as Shaun of the Dead, and it's almost like that approach to genre filmmaking again. Like, we're going to make a kung fu movie that's very much a kung fu movie rather than a spoof, but it's also a comedy. Like, it's a modern version of this genre that we like. And, that's not to say kung fu comedies didn't exist in the 70s and 80s, because they did, but it's a modern comedy, I suppose, would be a way to...
Well, I think it helps to contextualise the comedy as well, because I think the comedy in Kung Fu Hustle is very different to what there is in Shaun of the Dead.
Oh, absolutely,
in Kung Fu Hustle, it's Looney Tunes comedy, like it's cartoon, slapstick stuff for the most
completely
part.
Surreal at times,
Yeah, which I love.
But yeah, I mean, it came out. Stephen Chow is a writer-director who I think quite a lot of, although his career hasn't quite borne out the success that I thought it might at one time.
Yeah, especially because this did have a big crossover, like mainstream Western success, didn't it? And it didn't seem to pay off.
Well,
it doesn't seem to have.
He got a few Hollywood roles off the back of it as an actor. I think he was cast in The Green Hornet, the Seth Rogen film, but then he dropped out at some point. Maybe creative differences at play. He might have actually been tapped to direct that at some point, thinking about it. Who was it who played Kato, or whatever they're called in that film in the end?
No.
Well, it was going to be him at one point, anyway.
Jay Chu or Jay Chow, something like that.
I think he was kind of looking at that as his American crossover role, but it just didn't happen, and he's kind of gone back to making films abroad. And he's not really done much acting, to be honest, since he started writing and directing these things. But he did a film. I remember like having a really hard time digging it out, trying to get hold of a copy. It's probably a lot easier to find now. It's probably finally been officially translated at this point. But his follow-up to the film was a film called CJ7, which was a weird little thing about a kid befriending an alien from outer space that lands, and it's this little CGI E.T. flubber type monstrosity, and it was very kiddie and not particularly amazing. I mean, he's doing stuff. He's just kind of, I don't know, nothing he's done since has really had that same crossover appeal. And before he did this, he did a whole load of films, and I've only seen Shaolin Soccer, which is probably his second biggest film in terms of Western crossover appeal. And it's also a very good film, actually, Shaolin Soccer, if you like Kung Fu Hustle.
It's very similar, isn't it? It's got the same sort of slapstick comedy, physical comedy, a lot of it.
But prior to that, he made a film called King of Comedy. He made one called From Beijing with Love, which I think was a kind of spy movie comedy. He made a couple of others, and I want to see them eventually, but they're quite obscure and difficult to dig up, to be honest. But yeah, for whatever reason, this film in particular did get plucked out and brought to the West. And so what is it plot-wise? There's it's set in the 40s, and there's this kind of mafia-esque gang.
Is it actually set in the 40s? I wasn't sure like when it was.
Yeah,
supposed to be.
That was news to me actually. Hearing that,
I didn't realise until going into this rewatch, because when I was younger, I just kind of took it in as, it's set in some kind of weird fantasy Hong Kong.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I took it as.
No, I think it's specifically set in the 40s, which does explain a lot of like costume decisions and things when you go back to it. Pretty sure I read that. Maybe not.
But yeah, there is a sort of otherworldly sense to it, because right at the very beginning, it's very spaghetti western, like it's got a real spaghetti western feel to it, and then there's a lot of sort of 1930s classic gangster imagery as well, and it's sort of like it's not spoofing it, but it's using all this different imagery and then sort of clamoring it together. There's a bit of a dance number right at the beginning. Yeah,
but it's like the dancing doesn't even like correspond to any music that's happening. Like it's completely out of time with the music. So what is the plot? There's this pigsty alley. There's all these people living happily in their kind of simple lives, and then this. What is like a con man and his friends show up. They're kind of ragamuffin street rats, and
Stephen Chow.
Yes, they pose as members of the Axe Gang, trying to swindle people out of money, scaring them, saying, we'll get the rest of our gang on you. And then there's a misunderstanding with them throwing a firecracker, something in the sky. It lands on a passing Axe Gang member's hat. Then the actual Axe Gang show up, and it basically leads to a kind of war between the alley and the Axe Gang. A feud, I suppose. And Stephen Chow's kind of in the middle of it. And I mean, that's pretty much it. It's not the most focused.
Yeah, and obviously it transpires that a few of these villages are like kung fu masters, and so that sort of sets it up. But yeah, this is sort of number one of my problems with this film. I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. Is that Stephen Chow, who plays this kind of principal character, is a little bit lost in the middle, and he's kind of a floating protagonist that we're not. And he's a bit of an anti-hero. You know, he's a dick throughout most of the film, playing off both sides. And sometimes he just disappears for a while we concentrate on the action between other people. And it's like, I'm not quite sure who this story's about, who I'm supposed to be following, and it lacks a bit of structure in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's true.
I agree.
Yeah, and we get this kind of token emotional backstory that in itself feels like a bit of a spoof.
Yeah, I mean, I think it works well enough. It's very basic and simplistic, but I think it's handled with enough aplomb.
Yeah.
No, but I agree with Alan's point about how unfocused it feels for, certainly I would say like the first half an hour, 40 minutes.
Yeah.
Because Stephen Chow does become, by the time the film ends, the main character, and I think he's the only one with... the only one whose journey we really focus on. And for the first half an hour, I was kind of all right with it being, okay, well, if this is an ensemble piece, because we see all these different residents in Pigsty Alley, and some have their own individual powers, and there's the landlord and the landlady, who are big figures there. And I was fine with going along with it as like, okay, well, it's this ensemble thing. We don't really have a main character. It's just about this community. But at the same time, it took a long time for there to be anything for me to latch onto as regards to plot.
I've always felt like it was a bit of a slow burn. Like the first 20 minutes were a bit like, and then it kind of kicks into gear. I'd say about the time the Axe Gang properly attacks the village, maybe, but that is a good 20-25 minutes into the film.
And it loses focus as well by the end. Because it's been all about this little village and they're sort of saving themselves or whatever. And then it becomes this big personal thing between the landlord, landlady and this kung fu master that they just find in a prison. And it becomes this very personal battle between them. And the Axe Gang becomes secondary. Stephen Chow's story is even more secondary. It really just drifts all over the place. And especially by the last half of the film, it basically just descends into a load of fight scenes, which is all right, I suppose, for a martial arts film. But it just was it was inconsistent, and I'm not sure really what was it aiming for. I'm not sure what it was trying to do.
I think that the action scenes in this film are remarkably brilliant. I think it's a big part of why it works for me, in spite of the flaws that exist here, because they are just so phenomenally good kung fu sequences for the most part. They're really well choreographed. They're so like constantly inventive. They keep throwing all these fantastical elements into the mix. There's obviously at one point in the film, this pair of villains show up who have a musical instrument that basically attacks you with like sound waves, and there's this sequence where this guy's walking along and you see a cat jump across the alleyway behind them, and then the shadow of the cat kind of cuts in half, and just it's just these
and these sound waves, like you say, that they're attacking with, they take a kind of visual form of swords or a skeleton army at one point, and it's never quite clear if they're creating some sort of magical thing or if that is just a visual representation for the audience.
I think it's meant to be visuals for us, just to kind of see what they're... Because then, these guys start like punching them away and so on. And I think it's purely so that we can kind of see what they're doing and they're not just punching the air. But
and I like it. It's very visually inventive. It's cool and it's fun to watch. But I don't really know what they're trying to do, and it doesn't sort of match with anything else in the film, particularly.
I think it does. It's just different. None of the other fantastical.
But none of the other fighting styles are kind of magical in that
They
sense.
are. The landlady woman's got her big booming voice, and then they get the bell and turn it into a megaphone so that she can. I mean, again, that's more of a kind of.
stretching of science rather than it's not quite supernatural magic sort of thing that the other. I don't know. It's just, that's what I mean. Like all these different powers and things. It was all inventive and interesting. I'm not quite sure there was an overall plan to make them all work together. It was just a sort of a series of funny ideas.
Yeah.
My overall kind of evaluation was fun but messy, and I think that sums it up quite well.
I think that's
I enjoyed it,
fair,
but it just felt very messy. Can we talk about the village and the villagers?
Yeah. I was going to ask if we could talk about the characters, because like I love pretty much everyone in here in this village, and I love how we're introduced. to them all.
Yeah, same. I particularly love the landlord, who's this kind of, I don't know, how would you describe him? He reminded me a bit of like Gomez from the Addams Family, in that he's very, I don't know. I don't even know why.
But it's this little village, and they're all just sort of trying to scrape a living. And the landlord and landlady who own the whole place, obviously they're taking all money. Everyone's behind on the rent, so no one can stand up to them because they all owe them money. And so they get away with whatever they want. So the landlord's like a drunk who just wanders around helping himself to whatever he can get.
Like spying on women.
While the landlady... The landlady does all the kind of shouting and the bossing about. But it's very, I watch a lot of 70s sitcoms, and it's very much in that mould.
Oh yeah, doesn't she smack him with a rolling pin at one point?
Yeah,
she's got a hair curl. She's never without a cigarette.
Yeah.
I really loved both of these characters, and certainly in the first 45 minutes or so, I think they're the funniest people on screen. I was kind of disappointed when they're revealed to be quite significant figures, quite significant serious figures as masters of certain techniques of kung fu and whatever a bit later on in the story, and you have to take them seriously later on, whereas I just kind of liked them being these hilarious side characters in these early parts of the film.
And some of the other hilarious side characters, for example, go on.
Should we talk about the gay guy?
Well, the tailor.
Yeah.
The tailor
loved him.
I just loved how... Well, they obviously went, right, we need to make it very, very clear this guy's gay. How can we show that physically? And he's just like, don't worry, I'm an actor. I'm all over this. The most atrocious gay acting I've ever seen.
The thing is,
I thought it was intentional, wasn't it?
When I was 14...
You thought that's what gay people were like?
No, when I was 14, I don't think I even picked up on the fact that he was meant to be gay. I think when they first called him Fairy, I somehow, missed that. I thought, what? Is that his nickname? What's that? And then I didn't realise that him prancing around, crying was, that he was meant to be gay.
Oh, I loved that.
So it's only sort of...
It was brilliant.
On one of the rewatches I did afterwards, I was like, oh, he's gay, okay. But then the film's very much making a point of... it's this odd little thing thrown in where they're clearly trying to say, what, you thought he's gay, so he's a wuss? Nah, mate, he's well good at kung fu. And they get him into, twice he has a pretty big action fight, doesn't he?
Huge.
Yeah.
And he's one of the cooler characters with regards to his, fighting style, I think. He gets these metal rings from his tailor workshop, puts them on his arm, and so his style's built around sort of using them
blocking
to get
things,
more momentum into his punches and blocking and stuff, and
Well, there's him, and then there's the baker, and then another character who form this trio of they're sort of closet kung fu experts, really, and saved the village in one of the big fights, and they're the ones who were assassinated later on by the sitar playing guys, whatever that thing is.
But this was another issue, because you got the baker, you've got the tailor, who are kind of really well established, and then there's this third guy who's just like, oh yeah, and him as well. And then he gets killed sort of quite quickly, and then the other two have a big standoff, and it was just like, did they just not like this guy? They had a bigger role, and then they go, "Oh, we need to get rid of him quickly because he's a dick." It was weird writing.
Strange from just a pacing perspective. How that character, he just has his head sliced off, and that's it. He's not given a moment to fight. And I thought, oh god, the other two were going to be taken out like this. And I mean, in a way, maybe I added to my enjoyment, because I really liked these three. And at this point in the film, I didn't really know. I don't know who Stephen Chow is. So anyone in this film could be Stephen Chow.
Racist.
So I don't know who is. No. No, I mean, like, I could have bought anyone as, like, the Stephen Chow, because I had no idea what he looks like, so I assume he's going to be the lead. Any of these guys could have been, and I was perfectly settling in for the film to be about these three guys and their journey or whatever. And then when they all start getting bumped off one by one, I was a bit upset, but then... because the other two, the Baker and the Taylor, have these big fight sequences. Oh, well, maybe they'll get away. Maybe one of them's Stephen Chow, and they're not all going to die. But...
yeah, and the most of these kung fu masters is the standard procedure is that they don't look like a martial arts guy. They're like
unassuming,
a homosexual, for example. But even that is. Like, you know, they're like kind of look like they're middle-aged, you know, kind of, slightly balding or, you know, just a sort of inauspicious, you know, a baker or whatever. And that's pretty much the same for every character in the whole thing, you know? And that seems to be the standard joke. Oh, they don't look like a martial arts person, but they are.
I have a question about one of the people in this vicinity. There's a barber who has his bum hanging out of his trousers all the time. Why is that? Why?
It's a comedy trait.
I did feel like perhaps something was being lost in translation there. I must say it's an odd little thing that keeps coming back and doesn't really seem to go anywhere.
He's probably the most set up villager character who doesn't then end up being a martial arts person. So I was kind of expecting him to do something and then he didn't.
Yeah, me too, because there is a point where the three experts have been killed and the village are talking about how we're going to defend ourselves and all this, and he kind of steps forward as being like, I will be the chosen one to learn all these techniques and I'll save us all, and then he's quickly knocked out, and that's kind of it. He's not really in the rest of the film, but he has quite a few big scenes towards the start where he's around with the landlady, and then Stephen Chow turns up at his barber shop. So yeah, I thought he was going to go somewhere, but he didn't. But then I think I might have liked that about the film, actually. Like, I genuinely had no idea. I don't know who any of these people are, because I'm not terribly an aficionado of Hong Kong cinema. Maybe I should be, but I didn't know who the main character was going to be. I didn't know where it was going to go, and that kept me guessing and kept me hooked.
Yeah.
One thing we've touched on but haven't really gone into detail is there are some, like, actual cartoon elements.
Yeah, like, completely surreal, out of nowhere, weird cartoon elements, yeah.
So, for example, Stephen Chow comes and sort of harasses this village a little bit, and the landlady chases him out of town. Literally chases him out of town, where they do the Scooby-Doo fast legs thing, and then they're racing down the street in a prolonged sequence.
But that's it. They do the fast legs thing, and then the legs hit the ground, and it's like a motorbike chase, but they're on foot. Yeah. And I mean, it's to the point that, like, he's got he's been stabbed a couple of times earlier with these blades. So at one point he looks at the reflection in the knife on his shoulder as if it were a rear view mirror.
But this was it. These elements here, I was really enjoying it, and like I said, like later on in the film, it becomes more about these fight sequences that they do have elements of comedy in them, but it lost its way a little bit for me. And whereas this first sort of 40 minutes, I was really quite into it a lot more. Even though it was still complete madness and didn't make any sense.
It, like you say, it has elements of that up until the end. Like, even in the final moment when he does the palm of Buddha or whatever it's called, this prophesized move that no one has ever seen before. And he like jumps up into the sky and then like steps on an eagle that's passing by and like sort of gets a little bit of extra air by like hopping on it, and it's in slow motion. It just kind of squawks like, and like it's very odd. What else? I think the music's amazing. I want to mention that. I think the score to the film like really lifts it up a few notches above what it would otherwise be. It just adds a whole extra layer of like emotional strength to it. Like, it kind of helps you just buy into the film as more of a proper film rather than a series of skits, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know if it stood out to me one way or the other. I think I probably enjoyed it. Like, I didn't really end up making notes once I started watching the film, because I was really engrossed in it. I was really, really enjoying it. And that's probably a compliment to the music more than anything, that I, didn't single it out as an element particularly. It just all worked together really well.
I love the music. Yeah. I think it's great.
Yeah, some of the special effects were... maybe it's because the whole film just had a cartoony, like, Looney Tunes vibe, because some of the special effects I thought were pretty dreadful.
Yeah.
But they weren't trying to hide it. Like, it was just... Like, there's a bit where, like, the sequence we talked about where Stephen Chow's being chased by the landlady, and there's a point where she, like, goes flying into, like, a sign by the side of the road, and it just looks terrible, the effect. And when this beast guy's, like, toading out again, it looks terrible. Yeah. But
the worst bits, I remember him toading out, and there's a bit where I think it might be the landlord, someone's, like, chucked out of a window and you see them fall to the ground, and it's really bad. But it's CGI from 2004, and it's a Hong Kong film with a much lower budget. It's on par with, like, Doctor Who. It's that sort of, like, ropey CGI that you just got to kind of go with, I think.
And I'm not saying it's a really bad thing, but I'm saying that I think it's brave of them to do what they did with it. Like, they weren't hiding it. They didn't cut away from it to something else, or they just had it there on screen and take away from it what you will. But I didn't mind it. It just looks, ropey, as you say.
Yeah.
But I went with it because of the whole cartoony vibe.
And
it didn't take me out of the
I'd
movie.
say on the whole, the special effects are actually really impressive throughout the film. When you take it as a whole with all of the very elaborate action sequences and when it was made and the budget, like, it's very rare, all things considered, when you think about how many effect shots are in it, that one of these really shit-looking ones kind of takes you out of it. But there are a few very notable moments with, like, that's CGI there, that doesn't hold up. And then, I don't know, I guess, like, that whole sequence with the super fast running, like, it's clearly fake, like, it doesn't look remotely realistic, but then what they're doing, like, I don't think you could ever make that look realistic, like, running like a cartoon character with, So, it's almost that whole thing of, for a while, I remember people were wondering if Pixar were going to kind of get to the point where they were making photorealistic films, and then they sort of came out and said, well, no, obviously we're going to do, like, stylized humans that don't look real, because otherwise what's the point? And it's like, I think it's, a similar thing at play with bits of it here, but yeah. And then I guess the only thing we haven't really mentioned is the sort of romantic subplot that kicks in, which is
oh god, I completely forgot about
very
that.
much an attempt to give the film a bit of an emotional backbone, I guess, but it really is just like like one scene to set it up and then one scene to pay it off.
I'd forgotten about it completely, actually, by the time the scene was there to pay it off. So I was completely not invested in that. I didn't know if it was Stephen Chow's story, because he's got this sidekick who's kind of the Lenny to his... No, the what's the big one in Of Mice and Men?
It's Lenny. It is Lenny, isn't it?
Yeah, Lenny's the
George.
Big one.
Yes, and George is the little one. Yeah. He's sort of the Lenny to Stephen Chow's George. And then I wondered if is the love story about him, because he's in the scene with the woman towards the end, isn't he?
Is he?
Oh, I don't know. I might be remembering it wrong.
He's not in the flashback.
Yeah,
he might be in.
Yeah, he is. I know what you're talking about, because I thought that as well. That might come that way, and yeah, like I said, I don't know if those are really much of an ending. It's just kind of it's like, oh yeah, that's that.
Yeah.
Is there anything else? I think this is what I was saying. Like, I think there's a testament to this film, the way we've spoken of it. We have just sort of like, and this bit and sort of flitted all over the place. It's because there isn't much of a structure to this film, and so it doesn't invite a very linear analysis.
No, that's true. But I really enjoyed it. Like, I really
it's
liked
fun.
it. Shall we do ratings?
Yeah.
Are you ready? Yeah.
Yeah. So 8 out of 10 from me.
Ooh.
I give it a 7.
Ooh.
A solid 7 though.
Objectively, I should really bump this down, but at the same time.
Screw being objective.
But that's it. At the same time, I'm going to embrace being positive and giving a nice high score. And I think this film is certainly the best kung fu movie I've ever seen. It's the best example of that genre.
How many have you seen, Sol?
I mean, more than you, I would gamble. Maybe 10 or 15. I don't know.
Oh, well, I've seen this and The Man with the Golden Gun, so I
Does
guess
that
that's
count?
much of a...
But it's the best example of a genre that I've seen. And when I first saw it, it really did blow me away with the quality of the action scenes, but then the comedy to kind of carry me through. So, because a lot of these kung fu movies can be very just, po-faced and overblown and just nonsense.
all your classic sort of samurai films that are set in the 14th century or whatever are always so po-faced. And then you sort of your classic martial arts films like your Bruce Lee kind of thing are always just so badly made and shitty dubs and all that, like that classic 70s kung fu that Quentin Tarantino probably loves. Is actually shit.
But there's even some good, classic comedic martial arts films. But this is very much, carrying the tradition forward but I'd say again it's better than the old ones I've seen, and one of the ones I've seen had like ghosts and monsters in it, so it's competing with that. So I give it a 10.
Oh, wow. Yeah, well, no, fair enough.
You stick to your guns.
Yeah, I mean, objectively I should probably bump it down, but I don't want to.
No, don't. We don't. I never rate objectively on this.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't either. Otherwise, I mean, God, if you did, I'm sure Resident Evil wouldn't be as low down in our worst film rankings as it is, because objectively it's...
Compare the action in Resident Evil to the action in this film. This is what
it's no
comparison should be.
It's I completely agree.
This has slow-mo moments.
Yeah, but they're done, well. And they're used sparingly as well. They're not,
We could now go straight into pitch ideas.
Yeah.
Because that kind of plays into what... Because I was thinking Kung Fu Hustle, it's parodying a lot of, spaghetti western gangster films. So could you do, a Kung Fu version of a different type, just a different genre?
I mean...
Or perhaps go full into, do a Kung Fu sci-fi...
What I should mention is there was a sequel to this film announced in 2005. Officially announced. Stephen Chow was working on a sequel, which I found weird because it does seem like a very standalone film. And obviously you could easily just carry on the story, but I wonder to what extent it would lose the charm of these people all being nobodies who have secret powers and just become a load of overblown nonsense in the process. But it was officially...
you could take the Stephen Chow character and now he's discovered his powers and he's sort of, by day he's a lollipop salesman and by night he helps the A-Team. He just goes and helps people fight.
Or Pigsty Valley, he moves... what's it called? Pigsty Alley. He moves in and it becomes a sort of kung fu master school and they're just training up all the... They're all working as teachers there now. I don't know. It's... But yeah, they were working on it, but they put it on hold so that Stephen Chow could make that CJ7 alien thing I mentioned. Yeah. And it was set to be out in 2014 at one point, but that obviously didn't happen. And I think it has been officially cancelled at some point. So it certainly doesn't seem to be moving forward. Maybe at some point Stephen Chow will turn around and be like, "Oh, I've not had much success since that Kung Fu Hustle."
Well, it's worth noting that he's 55 years old now.
Is he really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So he was 41 in this film.
Yeah, 1962 he was born. So yeah.
Wow. But that that doesn't mean he can't make another He's still directing. It doesn't mean he couldn't do another Kung Fu Hustle.
Harrison Ford's doing another Indiana Jones, and he's like 80.
Yeah.
Oh, is he?
But even then, like, he could easily transition into the teacher role. That's a trope of these films. That's what Jackie Chan did with Drunken Master. You know, he's the student in the first one, then he's the old teacher in the second one.
How old's Jackie Chan these days?
Well, the second one was made in like the 90s, so he's that plus 20 more years now. But
Jackie Chan is he is currently 63, and he can still do it.
But yeah, one of the quotes here about the sequel was that it was going to have a lot of new characters, so it does sound like
you'd have to. Basically, I think you would have to just follow the Stephen Chow character. Everyone else would have to be new.
Yeah,
because you've done all those characters now.
So, I mean, what would be the best way to give him something else to do?
Well, that was it. I was thinking, do a martial arts version of other genres. What's like a martial arts James Bond or whatever, but like
the Man with the Golden Gun
from Beijing with Love.
Yeah, exactly. Do that. Maybe he's already done it.
How can you say that Roger Moore being sort of taken to a kung fu school is not a kung fu movie? There are even two. Anyway, no, we'll get there in a few months. But
to be fair, Roger Moore's 55 in that film as well.
Yeah.
I tell you what, I do want to see though. Stephen Chow makes Crank 3.
Oh, Alan, have you seen Mum and Dad?
A film called Mum and Dad?
Yeah, it came out recently. No. It's one of the Crank directors did it.
Oh, really? Is it any good?
I think you should watch it. I think you would like it. It's Nicolas Cage in the lead, and it's very Crank humour. And Nicolas Cage, like I saw it in the cinema, and people were like giggling away, laughing their heads off, purely at Nicolas Cage. I didn't realise he'd become mainstream to the point that people in the cinema were just laughing at him being like, you know, just walking around going, "What? Where are you?" You know, just like weird delivery of words, and everyone was giggling. And
I saw this. I saw the trailer for this, and my response was, "That looks fucking weird." But it's Nicolas Cage; he'll probably get away with it. But I didn't realise it was one of the guys.
I mean, it's the best performance he's given in a while. I've got to say, it's Nicolas Cage being like correctly cast, correctly directed, ushered into the right. He's a river, and he's like they're allowing him to flow in the right direction here instead of trying to put dams in place that don't work. So I recommend it for fans of Crank and Nicolas Cage because it's got lots of that, but it isn't very good.
I must admit the trailer was bizarre enough to intrigue me. Yeah.
But can we get Nicolas Cage in Kung Fu Hustle too?
It would make sense.
The American film star that comes to visit, and they have to like protect him. Stephen Chow's working as a bodyguard.
You know when what's it called? Tarantino and Rodriguez did those two films.
Grindhouse.
Trailers. Yeah, that's it. And they did the fake trailers, and one of them was Nicolas Cage as Fu Manchu.
Oh yes,
I knew I'd seen that somewhere.
Oh God, which one was that? I think it was like she-wolves of the SS or something, but then he was just in it at the end. It was like an Eli Roth thing. Oh no, Eli Roth did the Thanksgiving one, didn't he?
I like your idea, Alan, of looking at other genres and thinking like, well, what would a kung fu version of that be like?
It was Rob Zombie's
kung fu.
Werewolf Women of the SS or something. Werewolf Women of the SS. There you go.
I suppose I'd like to see a horror kung fu film.
Yeah.
Like, I did wonder if it was if Kung Fu Hustle was going there with the whole blood, the Shining reference, and
that's a really good shout. I would love to see that. I've seen a few.
Oh, really? It already exists.
Yeah, from like I say, from like the 70s and 80s. There's a film called, I think it's called Encounters of the Spooky Kind, or at least that's the English title. And it's very Evil Dead in a lot of its sensibilities, that kind of manic, cartoony. I think it predates Evil Dead, but that kind of manic whip pans and crazy camera angles and cartoonishness, and there's one called Mr. Vampire as well, which is about, I think it's about some morticians or something, and these Chinese chi vampires, and so like it was a thing that was done, and I think it would be really, really cool actually to see that brought forward into a modern film that does the same thing.
Because the horror genre has changed. We're in a post-Scream world, and everything's sort of smaller now, isn't it? Like that kind of your Paranormal Activity, your found footage kind of sense, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, you could. I don't know if that would translate, but you could do it as Nicolas Cage. Wait, do you want to? Are you setting this in America or in like Hong Kong in the 40s? Are we going for a Western market, or are we just doing what we want?
I think it should be set in China or Hong Kong, certainly. Keep that feel.
Modern Hong Kong. It's like everyone lives in like a little coffin-sized rooms because there's no room for anyone to live there.
Well, that could be, get a vampire in there in the little coffin room, get some comedy out of that.
You just do this as a complete like horror anthology where there's a Dracula and a Frankenstein.
No, I think it needs to be a solid plot, maybe with other things woven around it, kind of like Kung Fu Hustle's a bit meandering, but because these films it was always like this is the new mortician who's starting, or this young guy's learning kung fu, but then like a witch's curse is put on him in the woods, or it was always something like that kind of triggered something. So I think the best way to do it really would just be to do like a kind of homage to the classic subgenre that consists of like not a lot of films that I'm aware of. That Mr. Vampire thing though, they made loads of them. I've only seen the first one, but they did like 4 or 5 of them, and I've just looked up the Wikipedia page for martial arts horror films.
Oh yeah,
it's not very big.
Zap in the market.
It's got the Blade trilogy on there as well, so I don't know quite how much of this is real. But I mean, it is a thing. But it looks like Mr. Vampire and Encounters of the Spooky Kind are very much like 2 of the big hitters from looking at this. So,
well, I think what we need to do is go postmodern with it. So you have it as Nicolas Cage is in China, making a big like what they're doing now. He's
shooting
Ghost Rider 3. Crossover films, but these big crossover films where they do it with Chinese money, and it's really aimed at a Chinese market. They'll put a Western star in it. Yeah, Nicolas Cage is there making a film about a Dracula or whatever, and then it sort of all starts kicking off.
A chi vampire. Let's just do that again. Just rip it off. There's not many films about them.
What's a chi vampire?
I want to suck your chi.
There's a very specific kind of Chinese vampire legend, which is it's to do with how they like prepare dead bodies. I think they tie the feet together or something. So or I might have imagined that, but basically it's this vampire that can only like hop after you and kind of. Have you ever played Mario Land, the Game Boy game?
Oh yeah.
In the little like China world, like the third world, there are those little zombie things that hop after you.
Oh,
that's what they are.
Huh.
And the idea is you have to put like pieces of paper with the right kind of kanjis with like a magic word on them to like make them sleep properly, and it's a fascinating bit of local legend that isn't really explored very much in film. There's an episode of Jackie Chan Adventures that did it. There are the Mr. Vampire films, but that's all I'm aware of. And I don't think they drain your blood, they drain your like psychic energy, your life force.
Energy,
yeah.
Okay.
Which is probably essentially the same thing. It's just less literal, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you're sucking someone's blood, that's the same thing, isn't it? It's the analogy of it. So I like that. But I think if you're just sticking Nicolas Cage in it just for the sake of having a name, then that means he has to have like he gets assigned a personal assistant who's just like a young sort of 25-year-old Chinese guy who happens to be a martial arts master. It's some up and comer. And then it becomes this big thing where he's protecting Nicolas Cage. And so you either do it where Nicolas Cage has to get involved and fight and learn how to fight, or all this stuff's kicking off and they have to protect Nicolas Cage without him realising that everything's going wrong. And so it's like he's the unknowing kind of focus in the middle of it.
I've looked it up, and they're called, and I'm probably going to pronounce this incorrectly, but they're called Jiangshi.
Jiangshi. Oh, I've heard of that. Yeah, no, that is a thing, isn't it?
Yeah. This is it. There's not been a big Western Jiangshi film yet. So you've got some fun flavour to play with there. Even though this isn't Western, but it's going to, Nicolas Cage can be making the big, Jiangshi film. He's Fu Manchu, resurrecting the dead, his army of Jiangshi or something. We can get some comedy in because of the protesting, the people who are upset with him portraying a person of colour.
Yeah, yellow face.
Nicolas Cage is exactly the sort of actor who just wouldn't think and would take a role like that as well.
What was the film where he wanted to play it with a Jamaican accent and they had to say, no, you can't do it?
Oh, that was The Green Hornet. That film that Stephen Chow was nearly in. We've come full circle. Stephen Chow was nearly in it and Nicolas Cage was nearly in it.
So what did he end up doing in the end if it wasn't a Jamaican accent?
He dropped out.
Well, they just didn't do it. He said, if I can't do a Jamaican accent, I'm not doing it.
Oh, no way, really?
He was gonna be the villain. He insisted on doing a Jamaican accent. Michel Gondry was like, no, of course not. And he was like, right, well, fuck you then. And they cast Christoph Waltz instead.
Wow.
They knew they were on safe ground with Christoph Waltz. He can only do one accent. He's the Sean Connery of Austria.
Yeah, even in that Roman Polanski film where he's supposed to be like some just average Joe American.
He's an Austrian guy
class.
who lives in America, I think. But yeah.
Oh, is he? Oh, no.
But this is like whenever Arnold Schwarzenegger did films, like, they were written as like an all-American hero, and then they cast Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he's like, "My name's John Matrix. my name's Gordy Brewer. Good American boy." Right. What else can we put in this thing?
So what have we got? We've got Nicolas Cage is over in Hong Kong or China, filming a Chinese vampire movie, but obviously the Chinese vampire has to become real or something, and they don't realise that's got to be what's going on.
Oh yeah, they find the props guy I found these spells for making vampires or whatever, waking up vampires, and then they accidentally wake one up.
And now Stephen, I think it should be set in the same world as the first Kung Fu Hustle, but only tangentially. So can we get Stephen Chow in there at some point?
Well, he'd have to play like a 90-year-old version of his former character. But yeah, why not?
But maybe there's some old classic films about him. At one point, he became an actor, or they made films chronicling his life. Maybe they have to resurrect him to defeat the vampire using some vampire
He is
magic.
the vampire.
Yeah. What if those two guys with a musical instrument were from this tomb, and they were some creepy vampire men or something, because they were a bit vampiric.
Ooh, so we're tying it in even more now.
Or we can just have Stephen Chow and the mute. Stephen Chow and the mute girl's kid had a kid who's an intern on the film, a runner.
he's the sidekick.
Yeah. And so it's Stephen Chow's grandson.
And so he has to ring up his granddad to ask for help.
Yeah. He's got the little book, the little pamphlet handed down.
Oh, yeah.
And then everyone else, we just need colourful characters on this film set who, a Grip he's a master of lighting style.
Yeah, this is it, because all the people in the village, they had the baker used his rolling pins as staffs, and the tailor used these rings that was used for hanging up clothes. So we need that sort of thing. I think we should have hair and makeup guy who's very effeminate. But then he's like a knife guy with his hair scissors, whatever they're called.
I think we need more female fighters, actually. I think we need...
Ooh.
What was what was that thing that Frances McDormand talked about at the Oscars? Inclusion Rider? Is that it?
Yeah. All right, so we need as many women as men now.
Yeah.
Okay, well, what would a director Kung Fu Master do, given that we can't have them shouting through a megaphone because the landlady did it?
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. And you can't cut people either, because... Oh, no, that would be the editor, actually, wouldn't it?
Well, I think you got your hair and makeup with scissors as weapons. But yeah, I like the idea of like, your grips are just like just the shifters and haulers, like some big fat guys who just have to just moving the equipment.
Yeah, let's have a big fat guy style.
Yeah, you need a big fat guy style.
Yeah,
but you like belly bouncers.
yeah.
So like old wrestlers.
So that's your classic like Teamster is the big like fat guy.
Yeah, that's it.
And then can we have like a really angry sound man who like when he gets
that's
pushed,
easy. They're all angry.
When he gets pushed over the edge, he like kicks off. But maybe he like steals the sounds rather than like putting them out there, and that somehow you can have some weird fight scene where like it goes muted and silent, and that somehow affects the person's ability to like. Maybe it's dark or something, so he can't see them very well, so he's relying on sound, and then they, like, swallow up the sound. You can definitely do something with that.
Yeah. Plus, I think it'd be easy enough to have a big fight scene with, like, a 10-foot boom pole.
You could just swing it round like a pole. That's a fighting style, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or he could, like, put headphones on people and then play that special note that kills you from James Bond.
No, the brown note. Makes people shit themselves. Yeah, that's what you do. He can produce different noises that have a different effect.
Yeah,
can, like,
brilliant.
So he can blast you and knock you over, or like make you shit yourself.
Yeah, make you vomit. He can like make you temporarily blind with the right frequency. Just different bag of tricks. That's actually like exactly the kind of character this would have. So that's good. I like that.
Yeah.
Do we need a love interest in the film? I'm inclined to say no. I don't think Kung Fu Hustle needed it, so I don't think this is.
You do it if you don't have if you don't make it about a woman, then you have Nicolas Cage is every now and then he just rings up his daughter.
I was going to say,
like, no, I will make it to the softball game. Don't worry. And then he has to like get out in time.
And then he's like. Yeah, he's going to be late. He's missed his flight or something because the vampires are coming, and he like phones her up like, "Oh, there's vampires! Oh, vampire!" And she's like, "Oh, Dad, you'll say anything," and like hangs up. And he's like, "Oh no, daughter." Hey, maybe at the end he becomes a vampire and he flies home.
Yes. Of course, Nicolas Cage has history of vampire films.
He does.
So
he does. He loves it.
He knows what he's doing.
I quite like that story that we got for Kung Fu Hustle 2.
I think you could get a genuinely good film out of that with the right, approach taken to it, and make it happen. Stephen Chow, let's have it, man. Make it.
Nicolas Cage, and he will do it.
There you go. Kung Fu Hustle. Bit of an odd choice this week. And another very odd choice next week. Shark film. Deep Blue Sea. Actually next week. Don't know why we keep doing sharks. Calvin will no doubt attempt to justify himself next week.